Good evening. This is Donna Blomquist, librarian at the LaSalle Public Library. Welcome to tonight's virtual program, Apollo, Armstrong, and Artemis, the moon missions. Before we begin, just a few reminders. On Tuesday, July 25th at 6 p.m. Central Time, the library will virtually host ice cream enthusiast Natalie Martin for a program that celebrates National Ice Cream Month. Get the scoop on cool desserts. And on Tuesday, August 8th at 6 p.m. Central Time, the library will host in person historian and author Mark Walsinski when he talks about his newly released nonfiction book, Joliet and Marquette, A New History of the 1673 Expedition. And on Tuesday, August 15th at 6 p.m. Central Time, the library will virtually host historian and educator Caroline Kisshill, presenting Lives in Code, Stories of African American Resilience under the Illinois Black Codes, 1818 to 1865. This program is funded through an Illinois Humanities Grant, a state agency. As always, all library programming is free and open to the public. It is also shareable, so feel free to pass it on to others. This includes watch parties. Any of the library's programs can be watched by groups. We ask that you let us know how many people were in the audience by adding that information to the pop-up survey at the end of the program. And now, for tonight's program, we welcome Greg Ripley. Greg, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Let me see. Share screen. Let's put this. There we go. All right. Fantastic. I thank you for having me this evening. I'm very excited to be out and talking about the Apollo missions. Obviously, the best known astronaut of the Apollo missions, Neil Armstrong. And of course, the Apollo missions are in our past and bringing up what is our future, which is now our Artemis missions. And we've actually had Artemis 1 take place last year. If you have any questions, raise your, the chat function is, I'm going to make sure I got that. Raise your hand, shoot a question. I will be more than happy to answer questions as the evening goes. As I always promise the kids I work with and anybody else, I will do my best to be as absolutely boring as possible, and I hope to disappoint you by the end. There we go. To start off with, I am a representative of a program called the Solar System Ambassadors, and we should have another ambassador with us here in the audience. And the Solar System Ambassadors are a part of the public outreach of NASA and Jet Propulsion Labs. I'm sure you've heard at least of NASA. Jet Propulsion Labs is the best description of NASA administrates, JPL builds it. We are public outreach. We are 100% free to provide programming, and there's about 1,300 of us nationwide, a few also in England and Puerto Rico, and I believe there's one or two in Canada. So we get a great opportunity to go out and share, and that is what we always want to do. So to start off with, the space race is absolutely on. It is running, and it's the United States versus the Soviet Union. And in all reality, unfortunately, for those of you who are about my age, Rocky Balboa is not going to step up and beat Ivan Drago in a fight. Because as a matter of fact, as we look at it and talk about it, we are losing. We are losing big time. Everything Russia, the Soviet Union does, we do later. The only advantage we really have is we have a better safety record. And all of this starts from, there we go. All of this has started from Sputnik 1. And there's that simple satellite, 200 pounds, that flew for 2 weeks and went beep. Because now there is this huge fear. Who controls space? There's going to be weapons in space. So on September 12th in 1962, President Kennedy gives this famous speech. And he says, we chose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And it is a fantastic speech. I've watched it numerous times. I will tell you, you will get goosebumps watching him give it, because the whole time he's talking, he never actually looks at the audience. He's always got his eyes shooting for the sky, setting people to keep looking at it. It is a life-changing moment, because at that point, the moon was an eventual goal, but it wasn't, we have a decade to do it. But Kennedy was also playing a game. And it's a simple one in that they use in marketing, public relations, promotion, however you want to phrase it. And the best example I can give is always be first. We all know who is the first person to fly across the Atlantic, right? I'm sure we're all saying that was, Lucky Lindy. But no one pays attention to who the second person is who flew across the Atlantic. It's not common known. But we all know who the first woman to fly across the Atlantic is. Amelia Earhart. Now we realize who's the second person to have flown across the Atlantic solo, because we focused on her being first. So this is the moment. Kennedy has said what's going to happen. Through all of that, we have the Mercury programs and the Gemini programs, and they are setting the stage, but we're still behind. We're trying so hard to keep up, but we just can't do it. The biggest reason I have found is our number one concern always is bringing them back safely. The Soviet Union's concern was not always bringing back the crew safely. And the prime example of this was the very first mission where they sent up Lake of the Space Dog, and the goal was never to actually be able to bring her back. She was supposed to die in space. So Apollo is our goal. It's our dream. We're going to go from the Earth to the moon and come back again. But it's sometimes heartbreaking. And that was Apollo 1. Here we have the crew, and we've got the commander, Gus Grissom. He's sitting in the middle. Ed White, he was the senior pilot. He's sitting on the left. And Roger Chaffee was the pilot, and he's sitting on the right. Now, here's the sad thing on all of it, and we're going to look at the rocket. This rocket wasn't even fueled. This was a test mission. They were actually testing the capsule. And tragedy strikes. A catastrophic fire that does kill the astronauts. What causes it is there is 100% oxygen inside that capsule. The reason they were doing it is to avoid nitrogen in the astronauts' bloodstream. Liftoff and all of the things of flying into space is like coming up too fast from the ocean. You can get the bends. So the thought was to have them in a 100% oxygen environment. What they discovered is that a Teflon coating probably under the left seat, which would have been Gus Grissom's seat, had been frayed and penetrated, and it was a simple wiring issue. Just an electrical short actually causes this fire. What changes in this after the 22 months is, as you see in the future, the astronauts are walking into the ship. They're carrying a pack. The suit is 100% oxygenated. The capsule is actually normal air that would be on the Earth. Now, the fun thing is originally, or the sad thing, this was not an Apollo mission. This was the crew for the first Apollo mission. And after their deaths, they declared this to be Apollo 1. for 21 months, we're done with the missions. They're looking for what caused it. And they have to basically scrap everything we've done and go in and look for better options, how to do it safer, don't cut any ends. But through all of it, one great thing does come. A proponent to NASA, a fan, and a person who really advocates and lobbies for NASA. Because, see, Kennedy had a problem. He had to have more oversight in NASA. He also had kind of a rough-looking and tough vice president who wasn't always the easiest to work with. So he gave the job to Lyndon Baines Johnson. And what an advantage that was, because honestly, Johnson wasn't a thorn in everyone's side. He became this huge space fan. And if you look forward into space, it's actually Johnson, while he's working through this and in his presidency, that the space shuttle program is born. There's a simple reason, and it sounds odd. Kennedy did some great stuff for NASA. And there's a reason we launch from Kennedy. There's also a reason we command at Johnson. So now we're going to jump forward. Up until this point, all NASA or all Apollo missions are done without a crew. But we're ready for Apollo 7. Finally, a crewed mission. And in it, of course, we have Wally Schirra. He's in the middle. He's the commander. On the left is Don Eisel. The command module pilot is Walter Cunningham. There was no module attached, and it launches on the 11th of October, 1968. And there is a lot of tension between the crew and the ground. As a matter of fact, they almost declared it a mutiny. The crew is unhappy with how they're being treated by the ground. A lot of it is, this is the first time we actually see inside the capsule. There are cameras. They have lots to do, and now they have to constantly be showing pictures. The other thing is Wally catches a cold before he goes up to space, and it comes into full bloom in the capsule. He gets sick, and he passes it on to the other guys. They're uncomfortable, their heads hurt, their ears won't clear, and there's a lot of tension, to the point, because of this, none of the crew ever flies again. Now, Schirra had already announced his retirement, but as a question, they're considered troublemakers. They don't get to fly. Now, if you look at some sources, they say it was a technical success. The thing is, there's still questions for launches. They aren't 100% happy with the engines. They say they rattle. They say they shake. But Russia's getting ready to go to the moon. So we have Apollo 8. And this is the Hail Mary pass that should never have happened. This mission was never expected to be a success. Our heroes of this mission are on the left is Frank Borman. He is the commander. Jim Lovell, he's in the center. And Jim Lovell's over on the right, and Bill Anders is in the center. And they're going to go. They lift off right before Christmas, and they approach the moon on December 24th. NASA has been informed that they will have officially ruined Christmas for eternity if things go wrong. On December 24th, they approach the moon and get ready to enter orbit of the moon. And these are the first men to reach the moon. I know we celebrate Apollo 11 as when we make it to the moon. But 24th, 68, we make it to the moon. And the message they chose to give to the world, because the world stops and watches and listens. And it's very simple. They read the book of Genesis online or over the radio airwaves. And literally the world stops. The Soviet Union has to come out and at that point say the American space program has surpassed them. And they admit it, that they are thrilled, they honor these people, and then they end it with there is no God. In Muslim countries, they hear this and immediately their nations start calling the State Department. We're talking about some countries that are not allies of the United States. They want to talk to the astronauts. They want to know the exact printing of the Bible they are reading from, so their religious scholars can study it and talk to their people. And they have the one question, because they're going to go behind the moon. Have they seen God? As they orbit the moon, they go behind the moon. They've gone into orbit and they cross behind the moon and disappear for 30 minutes. It's radio static. We can't get a signal through, and we never have been able to. As they come out, Borman is a real commander and he keeps them on task. But Anders is acting as a photographer and he snaps this photo. The photo is titled Earthrise. And in it, we see the Earth as we've never seen it before. It's not a large object. It's not looking down, taking up most of the screen. It's a small, fragile planet. We can actually see over the moon. From this moment, this is actually the call to start the environmental movement. We realize we're alone out here. This is our planet. And as you can see, the moon is not a really nice looking place. Please, 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 let's take care of the planet. And to me, this is probably one of the best pictures ever taken. And no, they weren't planning on the shot. He just took the shot. The next very important mission, Apollo 9, actually just takes place in Earth's orbit. Apollo 10 is a huge stepping stone for our landing on the moon. We've got the crew here. Thomas Stafford, he's the commander. He's over there on the right. John Young, who is the command module pilot, is in the middle. And Gene Cernan is the lunar module pilot. They do also go to the moon, and they not only orbit the moon, the command module and the lander separate. For 2 hours, the lunar module gets closer to the moon than anyone has ever. And they're doing this on May 21st of 1969. Their important mission is to actually find the landing spot. And they actually have been told, really just kind of snoop around the moon and see where we might want to land. Well, as we know, astronauts can be kind of particular human beings, and all their crafts are named. So they started joking around, and the lander was named Snoopy. The command module immediately became Charlie Brown. So nowadays we would be talking about a lawsuit. There, Charles Schultz finds out about what's going on. They ask him if he minds, and his only comment was, well, I want to participate. And we get a special ambassador for all NASA programs. And that's Snoopy, astronaut Snoopy. Some of you might have remembered this toy. There are some people who say that astronaut Snoopy came after Apollo 1. No, he did. He came at Apollo 10. And Snoopy is so revered in NASA. Snoopy is the highest honor you can receive NASA-wise. It is called the Silver Snoopy. and that is actually one of the silver Snoopies. To give you an idea of how valuable a silver Snoopy is, if you're wanting, they're only $3,000 to $5,000 on eBay. This is for service above and beyond the call of duty. Now, some astronauts have them, most don't. It's usually for people who work on the ground. You can receive it once in your life. To me, the amazing thing is I spent a good 45 minutes recently trying to find who are the recipients to share, oh, hey, we could expect them to have one. And the list is not public. So it is a very private honor. It is a cool thing. And I think it's funny that our highest honor is a cartoon dog. So here we are, Apollo 11. We're celebrating, literally celebrating it right now. Sunday is the anniversary of the liftoff. I don't know if some of you saw on the social media the picture of Buzz Aldrin enjoying and honoring his crewmates having the same breakfast they ate of steak and eggs when they lifted off. And this is our ever famous crew. We got Neil Armstrong sitting there. He's our commander. In the center is Michael Collins. He will command be in charge of the command module. And there on the right is Edwin Aldrin Jr. Or at least that's what his official name is, but his nickname is Buzz. He got the nickname not because of his stylish haircut. It's simple. As a kid, his little brother couldn't say brother. So he called him Buzzer. So he's had the nickname his entire life. He is no longer Edwin Aldrin Jr. anymore. His comment was at one point, Edwin is my father, and he deserves to be himself. So his name was legally changed to Buzz. So when we land on the moon, we know that date, let's go on Apollo 11 on July 16th in 1969, it lifts off. Now there's one other really huge fan in the media when we're talking about Apollo and the space program. And it was somebody who was known for not really showing emotion, and that was Walter Cronkite. And on that liftoff, I think he said it best for our expectations when he is quoted as saying, "Oh boy," as he rubs his hands together. So on the 20th of 1969, we land on the moon. We hear Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed. There's some comments. And then if you listen closely, they talk about we need a moment. The question is, what happens in that moment? According to Buzz Aldrin, Neil, who is not a very religious man, bows his head in prayer. Buzz, who's a little bit of a pirate and a rebel, has smuggled something onto the craft. A church in Dallas provided him with a small chalice, a communion wafer, and some wine. So he gives a moment of thanks and takes communion on the moon. After that, they're told they need to eat to get ready to go out. And the first food actually eaten on the moon is bacon, which I think a lot of people appreciate. They have a 2 to 4 hour scheduled rest time. Now, NASA says that was scheduled, never fully intended. In case there's any issues, they want to be able to say we're holding up the stepping onto the moon. There's also the stories that Neil and Buzz just said, no, we're going out there. So they go out on the moon, Neil first with his famous words, and he walks around a little bit. And about 15 minutes later, Buzz joins him. While all this is going on, Michael Collins is on the far side of the moon, and it is the far side. It's not the dark side. It is lit. It's just not seen. And what we're looking at here is honestly one of the few photos we have of Neil Armstrong on the moon. he's getting something out or going in. The reason for this is Neil has his the camera. He is actually the actual cameraman. His suit had the attachment. So this is him. They think he's probably storing something or getting something out. They're not exactly sure. You see one of the experiments next to the flag. I believe that is the solar sail that was collecting the information on the solar wind. Other experiments, they set out a mirror, which the Earth can lased. We can see exact distance to this date. We still use it, and several other landing sites. What I think is cool is when the Earth wobbles a little more. One of the ways they've discovered the wobble is because lasing it, and that was after even the large earthquake in Japan. They checked and realized we have a greater wobble. Now, one great thing is Neil actually at one point, I know Buzz has been asked this question numerous times because of the gravity and the suits. It's not easy to get around. They don't know what got Neil to do this, but at one point he does pick his foot up and take a picture of his footprint. This has become very, very famous. And it's a great photo. Probably the most famous photo on the moon, though, is this one. And that's the picture of Buzz standing on the moon. Most people think it's Armstrong, but it is Buzz Aldrin. For the people who say the moon didn't happen, look closely into his faceplate. You can actually see the lander, and you can see Neil Armstrong standing there. For the 50th anniversary, they actually did a reversal of the picture. It's not real great, but they actually have it so you're looking at it as you are Buzz Aldrin. There we go. Lost it. There we go. While they're there, they leave this plaque, and it's signed by all of them and Richard Nixon, and who is president. It is attached to one of the struts, and it still sits on the moon. And then they left this. There's a piece of tool, and this is all the names of astronauts, both American and Soviet, who lost their lives in the goal of space. So this is the memorial for them. So there is a huge question on this. They only spend 2.5 hours on the moon. But at one point, when Buzz is back in this craft, Neil turns his back to the cameras and he goes radio silent. There is a huge mystery on what Neil did. Now, I know in a movie, one of the movies, it shows him leaving a bracelet of his daughter's. There's also a rumor that it was a locket she wore. Neil lost a daughter to cancer. The belief is he left something up there to remember her, that he got to go to the moon. What's really interesting about this is Neil missed the deadline to be an astronaut to fill out the application. He had a friend put the application in the astronaut office, and he put it in the middle of the pile. So it looked like Neil got his application in on time. Now, if you look at this, this is the ground of the moon, and it's referred to as regolith. I think it's fun. The astronauts describe this as sticking to nothing and yet sticking to everything. It is, they said, the oddest dirt they've ever had. When they get back into the ship and they do rest a little bit before liftoff again, they have to wear their helmets because the dust is floating around so much. But in high school or through school, we're always told what happens in a vacuum of space. There's no smell. When they get in, they suddenly notice there's an odd smell in the capsule. Neil describes it as the shooting range on base after it rains. Buzz referred to it as the day after the 4th of July, and that smell. There is a very sulfurous smell to the moon dust. Now, it fades after a while, but most people don't realize this. So that was an interesting fact they never, ever thought was going to happen. So they get in, they fly back, and here they are, our astronauts. They're in quarantine because they're afraid of what moon bacteria or moon germs was brought back from the moon. What I find very interesting on this is they got out of their capsule, helped by Navy men, flown to the aircraft carrier, walk through the aircraft carrier, and then go into quarantine. So if they brought anything back, they've already exposed people. But I absolutely love this photo as they're in quarantine. And for one of the main reasons is you see the smile on Mike and Buzz, but you see Neil is obviously laughing. Everything I have read is Neil was rather serious. Stoic was the word. There were some other strong words used about him. I like that he's just happy. Now, the fun thing is we look at this crew. Of course, Neil wasn't actually supposed to be an astronaut. He missed it out. Buzz Aldrin almost didn't get to go. He is known to have kind of an acerbic personality, gets on people's nerves, and right before they left, they actually gave Neil the chance to replace him. Jim Lovell would have flown and been the second man on the moon. His comment was Jim deserves to command his own crew, so he said no. This is where the Airstream trailer that they were supposed to quarantine in. Now, in there was also a cook and a doctor to maintain their health. As I said, they were supposed to be in there 30 days. They got out early when it was discovered by the people in charge that one of their favorite activities for entertainment was watching the ants come in and out of the floor in the crack in the floor. So obviously there was no quarantine needed. They got out. And yes, because they were out of country and went to the moon, they had to go through customs. So what happens to him afterwards? Well, here's Neil towards the end of his life. Neil was never really one to look for public fame. Wasn't comfortable with it. He ends up doing something he loves more than being an astronaut, and he is an aeronautic engineer at Purdue University. There's the statue that the university erected in Neil's honor. But he loves to walk the campus. He had a very particular path, and if you look down below, you see those famous footprints that took place on the moon. You can go to Purdue University and follow the path he walks because they used his footprint from the moon to show the path. Michael Collins, who unfortunately we just lost last year, went on and didn't think he did anything important. Well, after his time at NASA, he became the Assistant Secretary of State. He thought he did a lousy job. He didn't know what he was doing. What they discovered is he was a great ambassador. They could bring people in who were having issues. They could bring in countries that were warring, and they would put him in the room. He'd start talking. And amazingly, he was captivating, and people wanted to be around him and ask questions. And as he got going, other issues went away. Now, to me, his biggest accomplishment, besides being one of the first men to the moon, is the Smithsonian is expanding. And at that point, they're going to put in an Air and Space Museum. And this is something he's very proud of. He talks about it in one of his books. He is the first curator for the Air and Space Museum. So many of the displays are there because Collins works to bring them in. And finally, his other joy besides fishing is he becomes a painter. And there's one of his actual paintings. He did a lot of space-based paintings, but he actually sold many paintings and very popular. Now, here's the interesting guy. This is actually Dr. Buzz Aldrin. And when I say he's a doctor, he is actually a doctor. He, while early space was going on, was a student going for his doctorate at MIT. Buzz actually's whole thesis is how to dock ships in space. Nothing had ever been done. He's granted his doctorate because it makes sense, but they'd have to prove it. Buzz is great at self-deprecating humor. One of his happiest moments, he will state in one of his books, is he got to go on the Big Bang Theory and play himself and be the astronaut who can never get off the fact that he was in space. You see him dressed up fancy. They put him on Dancing with the Stars, and he was about 90. They said no old man could keep up with him, and he did. And his only comment was, I wanted to be able to prove I can do it. And there's good old Buzz with his t-shirt. He's a great proponent and pushes, thought we should never have stopped going to the moon, and wants to go to see everybody go to Mars. Of all three, he is the one who still believes in the space program the most. You can see there was a lot of comment on Sunday. He was wearing 3 wristwatches. Yes, he was. He quite often wears 2. Buzz is a very flamboyant person. He was described that way by everybody who's known him. And yes, he quite often wears the watches. They're watches that were given to him because of what he did and served on the moon. So our next big mission is the Apollo 13 mission, which honestly, a lot of people forgot about what happened in Apollo 13, like Apollo 8, until somebody made a movie on it. So here's our crew. We got Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert. Jim's in the middle. Fred is on the left and Jack Swigert is on the right. Now, usually we have the official crew photos in their suits. The official crew photo of these guys, they're in business suits because the last minute switch out that puts Swigert in is one of the crew might have had the measles. We know what happens. On their way to the moon, the quote is, they heard a pretty loud bang. And at first they weren't sure if anything was wrong. Fred Hayes had a habit of using a vent to cause a popping sound to make people jump as a joke. What they noticed was they were underpowered and there was a gas leak. And what we're seeing here is an actual photo of the damage to the ship. Now, this didn't come out as well. What happens is the switches were not rated to the level of voltage they needed. They're guessing a shelf was dropped in a moment or in setting it up that would hold one of the oxygen tanks. Most likely a fill line was loose. There was a spark. There was an explosion. They lose a lot of water. They lose their oxygen. And it is a fight for their lives. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this has become a highly sensationalized movie. And it's a good movie. But remember, at points, it's a movie. The absolute crisis that was going on was there. But NASA was better prepared than people believe. They are a firm believer in guessing and what's going to be our problem. What they do is they have binders. If there's a problem, grab the binder. What are we supposed to do? This is the first time, though, there was a problem of this size and then involving 2 ships. That's where a lot of the problems resulted in, where they had to jury rig things. Fun fact on this one, as they were figuring out trajectories, one of the NASA employees goes into labor. She goes to NASA, gets the information she needs, heads to the hospital, and figures out her portion of the calculations and sends it back to NASA. Then she proceeds to give birth to a son. Her son is Jack Black, the comedian and musician. So in the midst of a crisis, we get a comedian. Here's Splashdown. What we see is Jim is out of the craft and he's getting ready to help out Fred. In the process of this, the cold weather and trying to protect things, Fred gets pretty sick. Now, they are cold. I want to state publicly, and this is even from what Fred says, the anger and the fighting in the crew was not like that. He did not have any problem with Swigert. The scene you see where he and Lovell, he's shaking and cold, is he is literally having an extremely high temperature. They were using the urine collection bags longer than they should, and he developed a urinary tract infection. After Splashdown, he spends a couple of weeks in the hospital clearing it up. Now, in this famous moment, most people don't realize the actor Jim Lovell is actually meeting Jim Lovell. The captain of the ship, who you see there with his hand on Tom Hanks' shoulder, is Jim Lovell, who is still alive today. He does live in the Chicagoland area and loves to walk around the lake and other places. And from what they say, if you could bump into him, he will be more than happy to talk to you. But let's move on. Yeah, there's more missions to the moon. But now we're getting ready to go back. And here's the Artemis missions. These are the mission patches, the official Artemis, and then the patch for Artemis 1. And here's part of the crew for Artemis 1. Took place last year. Artemis 1 went longer and farther than anyone. In it was a crew of 3 mannequins, and of course, Snoopy as a zero gravity indicator. And what that is, if you ever watched, especially when they did the Dragon X1 launch, they put stuffed animals in the crew capsules. So when they hit zero gravity, instead of a sharp object or something that could hit a button, the stuffed animal will float into space, and they know they're in a microgravity situation. The mannequins are named Captain Moonkin Campos, and then Helga and Zohar. And it lifted off November 16th, 2022. What they're testing equipment, and also they're wearing a vest underneath the suit to help reduce cosmic radiation. And the reason for that is they have to consider things. Astronaut Scott Kelly, not part of these missions, went up to the International Space Station and spent a year up there. One of the important reasons is he had a twin who was also an astronaut, so they could test to see what happens and changes. His brother, Mark, is actually the senator from Arizona now. Scott and Mark aren't exact twins anymore. There's been changes in DNA in Scott. That hasn't happened to Mark. So we're looking how to protect our astronauts on a long-term basis. Oh, no. Okay, this is a horrible photo. You can't see everybody, but here's the crew of Artemis 2. We've got Reed Wiseman. He's seated. He's going to be the commander. Victor Glover, he's standing. His head is cut off. He's our pilot. Christina Hammock-Koch is our mission specialist, along with Jeremy Hansen, who's also standing without a head. He is from Canada and will be going up. So one of the points of Artemis 3, which is supposed to happen 2025, what they're saying is that is the best guess date. We should be walking on the moon by 2030 before that. What we're going to see with that mission is, number one, we will see a woman walk on the moon and a person of color walk on the moon. Hate how the phrasing of that. That is the official statement. The difference is, before, we have always gone to certain locations, and we can literally look up on the moon with a good telescope. You can find the locations. Here we're going to land on the south pole of the moon. I'm expecting, and what the guesses are, there's going to be a more permanent presence. One of the big ideas is that there will be some relays set up there, so as spacecraft go behind the moon, we will not lose constant communication. Through all of this, expect Gateway to be built. Gateway will be our next space station, with the ISS being taken out of service in 2030. And all of this is going to be our stepping stones and our building blocks to head off to Mars and farther than that, which I'm hoping I'm still an ambassador and can start talking about Mars missions. So with that being said, I didn't see a lot coming up in the chat, but I always know there are questions, and I'll open it up if anybody has any questions.
I'm just amazed. It's Donna. I'm just
Okay.
amazed at all these details that I had no idea about. I follow the space program quite closely, and I thought I knew more of the history than I did, and I love all these details, Greg. This was really helpful and expansive. I'm delighted to
Thank you.
learn these things. Yeah, you can't trust Hollywood on everything. That's for sure. I did want to comment when you were talking about Jim Lovell being a Chicago resident or in Chicagoland area, that for folks who haven't been there, the planetarium, Adler Planetarium in Chicago, has a wonderful exhibit of Lovell artifacts and Apollo 13 artifacts. If you haven't had a chance to go down there, I would encourage you to do so. It's a wonderful place to visit. Now, I think we have something on here, don't we?
Yeah, the question is, yes, India launched an unmanned lunar mission earlier this week. They're going to put, hopefully, a rover on around the south pole of the moon. Is there a reason to believe the US will be the first to send humans back to the moon? The answer to that is yes. We are the one nation that really has the craft and the ability to do a landing. Not to pick on India, they have sent 2 other probes and landers to the moon, and both of them have crashed. Right now, the actual lander has been selected. It will be built by Jeff Bezos and his Blue Moon Corporation, probably flown on a rocket by Elon Musk. And to me, that is probably we will be the first to the moon. The major programs, the European Space Agency works with us. The Canadian Space Agency works with us. Most agencies are now working through the United States for a lot of their manned missions. I'm not saying that we won't see more and more people going to the moon, but I think the US will be the first to be back sitting on the moon or putting people on the moon. And then it's going to be open season. While President Trump was in office, there was something that was going on, and the space-faring nations actually drew up what is called the Artemis Accords. And that breaks up the moon to areas that each country is allowed to enter and explore without permission of anyone else. What became very interesting is, at first, the US thought they were going to have to protect what we've already done. And it was the Soviet Union who very quickly, the area that was Apollo 11, they circled it. And we're like, no, 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 no. And the Soviet Union looked at him and said, No, that isn't anybody's. That is a historical spot. No one gets to go there until it can be preserved in such a way that history will always be able to go there. So yeah. Any other questions?
There is one from Mary.
Okay, please restate Artemis 2 timeline for second moon landing. Okay, Artemis 2, they're just going to go, they're going to set up the next landing. That they say should be happening 2024 is what they have said. They're expecting November. I'm not sure if that's going to be a complete goal. Some of that involves is everything, will all the craft be built? Will all the craft be certified and tested? And the final thing is one of our biggest issues that is looking to set us back on a moon landing is the fact, the design and the building of the new spacesuits. As for Gateway, Gateway will not actually be built on the moon. Gateway will be a space station orbiting the moon. The eventual goal to land on the Mars, that is very much Elon Musk's goal. It is something that NASA is looking at. The next mission for, will it be a shuttle? Nope, the shuttle program is completely shut down. We are seeing more and more women going to space. There's an interesting reason for that. Women actually make better astronauts than men. And we're going to have to go way back before even the Apollo missions. When Yuri Gagarin went up as the first man in space, he complained his vision got blurry and he got a headache. And Alan Shepard went up, even for a brief amount of time, and his vision got blurry. And he had a headache and he didn't feel right. And then they sent up Valentina Tereshkova for the Soviet program. And they asked how she was doing. And she said, I feel great. They said, is your vision blurry? She said, no, I see everything fine. They wanted to bring her back down because obviously if other people have gotten sick, she's not sick. The problem's with Valentina. What we have now discovered is men have a problem. They don't know why. Men's eyes change shape in space. Their vision will change. It causes problems. That's why on the International Space Station, there's a drawer full of cheaters and other glasses, because you might have 20/20 vision on the ground, but in space, not so much. It doesn't happen to women. So we are having that. So I will see more and more, expecting more and more women. What was it, last year or 2 years ago, we actually had the first woman crew for a spacewalk. I also see it this way. An astronaut, it really doesn't matter the sex of the astronaut. It is the quality of the person that's going up. Yes, the early astronauts were men, but also keep in mind, at least in the US, the early astronauts were all military fighter pilots who were test pilots, and all of them had an advanced degree, or most of them had an advanced degree. It took a very special person at that point. Most of them were actually aeronautical or aviation engineers. They were expecting problems. Now we have less problems. Watch after they launch one of the rockets, watch them land the booster and the actual rocket that takes them to space with pinpoint accuracy. There is so much more that can be done with a computer now. We're seeing that more people can go to space. That's why a couple of years ago, and I will say this, I could get in trouble. I am not a big fan of the tourist industry that space travel has become. But Elon Musk did send up 4 people about 2 years ago. One was a solar system ambassador, and she was the pilot. But what's fun is she was actually a rotary wing pilot. She was not a jet pilot, one of the commander of the mission was a former astronaut. There was another artist, and a pediatric oncological nurse. And what they proved is we do not have to go through years and years of training with a smarter rocket, and that we can send the people up into space without having to spend time and money. It's going to take a lot less time. We will see more people going to space. Any
Greg,
other
there
questions?
is another question from Mary. She asks to please restate when and who took communion and wine on the moon in the
Oh.
lunar module after the landing, question mark.
I did not see that one. That was Buzz Aldrin. It is, I can't think of the Methodist church, the copy of the chalice is sitting in, but you can see a duplicate of the chalice sitting in the church. The actual chalice is locked. And I mean, when as it's described, it's about this, the chalice is about the size of a shot glass. It is in a safe in the church, and it will remain there, from what I understand, until the death of Buzz Aldrin, and then the family may decide where they eventually want it to go. The reason we can only see a replica is it disappeared for about 10 years. Somebody stole it.
Okay, any other questions? I think you've covered them all with great insight and so much information. It's just been so exciting. If anybody does have additional questions, please email to Rachel's email address, and we will pass those questions on to Greg and get you some answers.
Yeah, I can also be reached at Ripley Greg, and it's GREGG, and that is at Twitter. That is my official, what I use for anything NASA or people who want to talk to me about that. Even though I do a lot with Facebook on it, that's kind of my personal stuff. So, but I'm more than happy to talk to people. If you want to go to the Solar System Ambassador page, you can find me on there too and send me messages.
Great, that's perfect. Well, thank you to our audience for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed the program. Please complete the short pop-up survey that will appear when we close the Zoom connection. Greg, I'll turn it back over to you for closing comments.
I just put a message to everybody. Hopefully I was not too boring. As my family says, I can go on about this stuff for hours.
Well, I think all the solar system ambassadors can, really, and we appreciate it. It's information we don't have ourselves.
All the information I found, yes, there's all kinds of stuff on the internet. Definitely, there are fantastic books. I know the LaSalle Library is a fantastic facility. If they don't have the books, interlibrary loan will get them for you.
For sure. All right.
So thank you for your time.
And now I'll thank everyone again. And until next time, good night.
Night.